The fluorescent lights of the ICU hummed overhead as Melanie Brooks pressed her forehead against the cool glass of her son's hospital room. Through the window, she could see Tyler's small body dwarfed by the tangle of tubes and wires keeping him alive. The rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor had become the soundtrack to her nightmare. Each electronic chirp a reminder that her vibrant 7-year-old boy was just one failed machine away from slipping through her fingers forever. Her fingers trembled as she scrolled through yet another medical form on her phone. The insurance portal showed a balance due that made her stomach clench, $27,843.62, just for the first 48 hours. She'd already maxed out her credit cards paying the deductible, and the stack of unopened bills in her purse threatened to topple her carefully constructed financial house of cards. A nurse pushed past her with a cart of medications, snapping Melanie back to the present. She checked her watch, 3:17 p.m. Exactly 72 hours since the school's number had flashed across her phone screen with those awful words. There's been an accident during recess. The memory played on loop in her exhausted mind. Tyler's Spider-Man backpack bouncing as he skipped to the bus that morning. His last words, "Love you to Pluto and back, Mom." The way his small hand had felt in hers when she'd squeezed it goodbye. Now that same hand lay motionless on the hospital sheets, an IV taped to the back of it. Melanie jumped when her phone vibrated. An unknown number. Her thumb swiped accept before she could think better of it. Double quotes Ms. Brooks. "This is Dr. Chen from neurosurgery. We've reviewed Tyler's latest scans." The voice was professional but edged with something that made Melanie's knees weaken. She braced herself against the wall. "The swelling has increased more than we'd like. We're going to need to take him back to OR for a decompressive craniectomy." The medical term landed like a physical blow. Essentially, we'll remove a portion of his skull to relieve the pressure. Melanie's vision tunneled. She could hear the doctors still talking risks, benefits, consent forms, but the words blurred together into white noise. Her mouth moved automatically. "Whatever he needs, just save my boy." As she ended the call, the ICU doors burst open. Amanda strode in like she owned the hospital, her designer heels clicking against the linoleum. Even in crisis, her older sister managed to look polished, cashmere sweater perfectly draped, diamond studs catching the fluorescent light. The familiar wave of resentment bubbled up in Melanie's chest before she could stop it. Amanda barely glanced at Tyler's still form before zeroing in on her. "We need to talk about the property." Melanie blinked. "You're joking." Her voice came out hoarse from 3 days of crying. "You come here, now, to talk about rent." Amanda's mouth tightened into that familiar thin line, the one that always preceded one of her ultimatums. "Business doesn't stop just because you're having a family crisis. Melanie, I'm raising your rent to $6,800, effective next month." The number hung in the air between them, absurd and cruel. Melanie actually laughed, a broken sound that startled even herself. $6,2. That's triple what I pay now. You know that's impossible. Then you'll need to be out by tomorrow morning. Amanda crossed her arms, the gesture pulling her sweater tight across her shoulders. "I've already got potential tenants lined up." Melanie stared at her sister, really looked at her for the first time since she'd entered the room. Beneath the carefully applied makeup, Amanda's face was drawn. A faint tremor shook her manicured hands. This wasn't just about money, something else was going on. "What did you do?" Melanie asked quietly. Amanda's carefully constructed mask slipped. "For just an instant, nothing that concerns you. I just need the money." "Gambling debts?" Melanie guessed, watching her sister's face carefully. The slight twitch in Amanda's left eyelid confirmed it. "Jesus, Amanda. How much this time? It's not your business." Amanda's voice rose enough that a nurse glanced over disapprovingly. She lowered it to a hiss. "Either pay the new rent or get out. Those are your options." Melanie looked from her sister's furious face to Tyler's still form. The machine's keeping him alive. The doctor's about to cut into his skull, the mounting medical bills, and Amanda chose this moment to drop this bomb. Something inside her snapped, without a word. Melanie reached into her battered leather tote, the same one she'd grabbed in panic when the school called, and pulled out a black envelope she'd carried with her for years, just in case. She held it out to Amanda. "What's this, a check?" Amanda's fingers tore at the envelope with none of her usual precision. The documents inside fluttered slightly as her hands began to shake. Melanie watched with detached fascination as her sister's face went through a series of transformations: confusion, disbelief, dawning horror. The color drained from Amanda's cheeks as she flipped through page after page of legal documents. "This, this says Horizon Investments owns my building. All the properties." Amanda's voice had gone strangely small. "That's not possible. The management company told me Horizon Investments is my company," Melanie said calmly. "I've owned your building for 5 years. The monitor beside Tyler's bed chose that moment to erupt in a cacophony of alarms. His small body jerked violently against the restraints as a seizure took hold. Nurses came running, shouting medical terms Melanie didn't understand as they descended on Tyler's bed. Code Blue, I see you forget Dr. Wells now. Melanie was already moving, her confrontation with Amanda forgotten as she watched her son's body convulse. The last thing she saw before being ushered out was Amanda standing frozen in the doorway, the legal documents hanging limply from her hand, her face a mask of shock as the medical team worked frantically to save Tyler's life. Outside in the hallway, Melanie slid down the wall until she was sitting on the cold floor, her arms wrapped around her knees. The envelope had done its job. Amanda would never bully her again. But as the code blue alarm continued to blare, Melanie realized with crushing clarity that no amount of property, ownership, or financial security mattered if she lost Tyler. The only thing that mattered was the fragile little boy fighting for his life behind those doors and the desperate hope that he'd still be hers when the dust settled. The scent of oil paints and turpentine still clung to Melanie's clothes as she tiptoed down the grand staircase of the Brooks family home, careful to avoid the third step that always creaked. At 16, she'd perfected the art of moving through the massive colonial without drawing attention, especially when returning from her secret art lessons, the ones her parents didn't know she'd been taking every Thursday afternoon instead of the SAT prep classes they'd paid for. From the foyer below, she could hear the familiar sounds of her sister holding court. Amanda's laugh, that perfect tinkling sound that somehow managed to be both elegant and infectious, rang through the house, followed by their mother's delighted chuckle. Melanie paused on the landing, peering through the balusters at the scene unfolding in the formal living room. Amanda, 18 and radiant in a designer dress their father had brought back from Milan, stood beside the baby grand piano, one hand resting dramatically on the sheet music as she regaled their parents and some family friends with what was undoubtedly another flawless accomplishment. Even from this distance, Melanie could see the way their father gazed at Amanda, that particular mix of pride and admiration he reserved only for his eldest daughter. Amanda's just been accepted to the Young Entrepreneurs Program in Boston, Richard Brooks announced to the guests, his voice booming with satisfaction. Only 20 students selected statewide. Of course she was, Melanie's mother, Diane added, reaching up to smooth Amanda's already perfect hair. Our Amanda was born for greatness. Melanie's fingers tightened around the banister. Just that morning, her art teacher had pulled her aside to suggest she apply for a prestigious summer intensive at RISD. You have real talent, Melanie, Mrs. Calloway had said, those kind eyes shining with sincerity. This program could open doors for you. But when she'd tentatively mentioned it at breakfast, her father had barely looked up from his newspaper. Art school. Don't be ridiculous, Melanie. That's a hobby, not a career. You'll major in something practical at a good school close to home. The memory stung as she watched Amanda bask in their parents' adoration. Taking a deep breath, Melanie continued down the stairs, hoping to slip past unnoticed. But her father's voice stopped her cold. There she is, our little ghost. Richard's tone was jovial, but the nickname still made Melanie's cheeks burn. We were just celebrating your sister's latest achievement. Maybe some of her ambition will rub off on you. Amanda shot her a triumphant smirk before turning back to their guests. Melanie's actually quite good at drawing, she said magnanimously, as if describing a mildly interesting pet trick. She did this cute little sketch of our dog that looked almost real. The condescension in her sister's voice made Melanie's stomach clench. That cute little sketch had taken her 14 hours and represented the first time she'd successfully worked with charcoal. But before she could respond, her mother was steering the conversation back to Amanda's upcoming debutante ball. Melanie slipped into the kitchen, where Maria, their housekeeper for 20 years, was arranging hors d'oeuvres on a silver platter. Without a word, Maria handed her a still-warm chocolate chip cookie, the kind with the perfect ratio of crispy edges to chewy center that she knew was Melanie's favorite. They don't see you, Maria murmured in that quiet way of hers that always held more wisdom than the entire Brooks family library. But I do. The world will too. Someday. Melanie bit into the cookie, letting the sweetness push back against the bitterness rising in her throat. She'd learned early that comparisons to Amanda were inevitable, and that she'd always come up short. Where Amanda was outgoing and charming, Melanie preferred the company of her sketchbook. Where Amanda thrived under the spotlight, Melanie would rather observe from the shadows. Even their physical similarities only served to highlight their differences. They shared the same dark hair and blue eyes, passed down from their father's side. But Amanda's features had a polished perfection that made people stop and stare, while Melanie's face seemed to fade into the background, pretty enough, but unremarkable. The sound of shattering glass jerked Melanie from her thoughts. From the living room came Amanda's dramatic gasp, followed by their mother's frantic cooing. "Oh darling, are you hurt? Maria, clean up in here." Maria sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. "The crystal vase, I suppose. Third one this month." Melanie followed her into the living room where Amanda stood amid the wreckage of what had been their grandmother's antique vase, looking for all the world like a tragic heroine. Never mind that she'd been explicitly told not to play with it. Never mind that the shards of delicate glass now scattered across the Persian rug could have seriously injured someone. Amanda's tears, those perfect, shimmering tears that somehow made her even more beautiful. They already had their mother clutching her close and their father murmuring reassurances. "Don't worry, princess, we'll get it cleaned up. Maria, handle this." Immediately, Melanie watched as Maria knelt carefully to begin collecting the fragments, her experienced hands avoiding the sharp edges. Without thinking, Melanie moved to help, but her father's voice stopped her. "Melanie, go to your room. Your sister's had a shock." The injustice of it burned in her chest, but years of similar moments had taught her the futility of protest. As she turned to leave, she caught Amanda's eye over their mother's shoulder. The tears had magically stopped, and in their place was something that made Melanie's blood run cold, a smug, knowing smirk that said clearer than words, "This is how the world works. Get used to it." Up in her room, Melanie slammed the door harder than necessary, then immediately regretted it when a framed photo of her and Amanda as children wobbled dangerously on the wall. She caught it just before it fell, staring down at the image of two little girls in matching Easter dresses, arms wrapped around each other with genuine affection. What happened to us? The thought surprised her with its intensity. There had been a time before the ballet recitals and piano competitions, before their father started calling Amanda my heir apparent when they'd been allies against the world, when Amanda would sneak into her room during thunderstorms and they'd build blanket forts together, when they'd promised to always be best friends. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Go away, Amanda," she called, expecting another round of gloating, but it was Maria who entered, carrying a tray with 2 cookies this time and a glass of milk. "Thought you might need reinforcements," she said, setting it carefully on Mel's desk. Melanie sighed, sinking onto her bed. Why does she always get away with everything? That vase was an heirloom. If I'd broken it, you'd be grounded until graduation. Maria finished with a wry smile. She sat beside Melanie, her warm hand covering the younger girls. "Listen to me, Nina. The world isn't fair. Some people get everything handed to them while others have to work twice as hard for half as much. But here's the secret. The ones who have to work, they're the ones who end up truly strong." Maria reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Your art teacher called the house phone earlier. She said to give you this." Melanie unfolded the paper to find an application for the WRIST summer program, already filled out in Mrs. Calloway's neat handwriting. All that was missing was her signature and the portfolio she'd been secretly assembling for months. "I can't," Melanie whispered, even as her heart leaped at the possibility. "Dad would never sign it," Maria interrupted firmly. "I'll mail it for you. And when you get in, because you will, we'll figure out the rest." Her dark eyes twinkled with mischief. "Your father travels next month for that banking conference in Chicago. Your mother always goes with him." Melanie stared at the application, the wheels turning in her mind. She could submit her portfolio, maybe even get a scholarship. The program was only 6 weeks. She could tell her parents she was at a study camp Maria would cover for her. For the first time that day, a real smile spread across Melanie's face. She threw her arms around Maria. "Thank you," she whispered fiercely. Maria hugged her back just as tightly. "Remember this feeling, Mia. Remember that you don't need their permission to be great." That night, as the house fell silent and Amanda's soft snores drifted through the wall between their bedrooms, Melanie carefully lifted a loose floorboard beneath her bed. There, hidden beneath a stack of sketchbooks, was her secret savings, babysitting money, art contest winnings. Even the occasional 20 slipped to her by Maria when she knew Melanie was running low on supplies. She counted it carefully in the dim glow of her flashlight. $847. Not enough for the full program, but maybe enough for the deposit if she got partial financial aid. Her fingers trembled as she filled out the application, pausing only to dab at the tear that splashed onto the paper. Somewhere downstairs, a clock chimed midnight. Melanie carefully blotted the application dry, signed her name with a flourish, and tucked it safely into her algebra textbook to give to Maria in the morning. As she replaced the floorboard and clicked off her flashlight, she made herself a silent promise. One day she would build a life where her worth wasn't measured against Amanda's. One day she would be someone who mattered. Little did she know how soon that promise would be tested, or how high the stakes would become. But as 16-year-old Melanie Brooks drifted off to sleep that night, dreams of art studios and independence swirling in her head, she took comfort in one undeniable truth. While Amanda might always be their parents' golden child, she, Melanie, would be the one to determine her own destiny. The hospital corridor stretched endlessly before Melanie, its sterile white walls closing in as she paced outside the operating room. The sharp scent of antiseptic burned her nostrils, mixing with the metallic temps of fear that seemed to coat her tongue. Her fingers worried at the fraying edge of her sweater sleeve, unraveling a thread that had come loose during 3 sleepless nights spent in ICU waiting rooms. Somewhere behind those double doors, surgeons were cutting into her son's skull, and all she could do was wait. The black envelope lay discarded on the chair beside her, its contents spilling out like secrets too long contained. Amanda hadn't even bothered to pick them up when the Code Blue team rushed in, too stunned by the revelation that her little sister had been her landlord all along. Melanie glanced at the papers now, the deed to the duplex, the LLC formation, documents, the property tax records, all bearing the name Horizon Investments with Melanie as sole owner. Proof that while Amanda had been playing at adulthood, Melanie had been quietly building an empire. A sudden commotion at the nurse's station snapped her attention back to the present. Amanda was arguing with the charge nurse, her designer heels clicking angrily against the linoleum. Even in crisis, her sister couldn't resist making a scene. "I don't care what your policy is. That's my nephew in there." Amanda's voice carried down the hallway, sharp with panic. "I have a right to know what's happening." Melanie pushed off the wall, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "Amanda," she called, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Leave them alone. They'll tell us when there's news." Amanda whirled on her, eyes blazing. For the first time since they were children, Melanie saw genuine fear in her sister's expression, not the performative kind she used to manipulate their parents, but real, raw terror. It stopped her in her tracks. "You," Amanda breathed, jabbing a manicured finger at Melanie's chest. "All this time, you've been lying to me, playing me for a fool." Melanie's laugh came out harsh and brittle. "Oh, that's rich. You show up while my son is fighting for his life to extort me for money, and I'm the villain." The fight seemed to drain out of Amanda all at once. She sagged against the wall, her perfect hair falling out of its sleek ponytail. "I didn't know it was this bad," she whispered, gesturing toward the corridors. "I thought, I don't know what I thought." Melanie studied her sister, really studied her for the first time in years. The faint lines around Amanda's eyes that makeup couldn't quite conceal. The way her hands trembled slightly, even as she tried to maintain her usual composure. The expensive handbag with a barely noticeable stain on the side, something the old Amanda would never have tolerated. "You're in trouble," Melanie realized aloud. Real trouble this time. Amanda's throat worked as she swallowed hard. When she spoke, her voice was so quiet, Melanie had to lean in to hear. 40,000. To some very dangerous people. A bitter laugh escaped her. "I thought tripling your rent would buy me a few months to figure something out." The confession hung between them, heavy with unspoken history. $40,000. Enough to make Amanda desperate enough to betray her own sister. Enough to risk making her nephew homeless during the worst crisis of their lives. Before Melanie could respond, the door swung open. Dr. Wells emerged in blood-spattered scrubs, his face unreadable. Melanie's heart stopped. "Tyler made it through surgery," he said, and the breath rushed out of Melanie's lungs so fast she nearly collapsed. Amanda's hand shot out to steady her, her grip surprisingly strong. "We were able to relieve the pressure successfully. The next 24 hours will be critical, but he's stable for now." Melanie nodded mechanically as the doctor continued explaining technical details about intracranial monitors and swelling reduction. The words blurred together. All that mattered was that Tyler was alive. He'd made it through. There was still hope. When Dr. Wells left, promising to check in again in a few hours, Melanie finally turned back to Amanda. Her sister stood frozen, tears tracking silently down her cheeks, ruining her perfect makeup. In that moment, she looked more like the big sister Melanie remembered from childhood than the polished predator who'd stormed into the hospital room earlier. "You should go," Melanie said quietly. "We'll talk about all of this later." Amanda opened her mouth as if to argue, then seemed to think better of it. She nodded jerkily, swiping at her ruined mascara. "I'll be at the house if you need anything." Melanie watched her sister walk away, her usual confident stride reduced to an unsteady shuffle. Part of her wanted to call Amanda back, to demand answers, to scream at her for choosing this moment of all moments to reveal her true colors. But a deeper, wearier part just wanted to sit by her son's bedside and will him to wake up. The ICU nurses let her back in as soon as Tyler was settled, his small body now sporting fresh bandages and even more tubes. The sight stole what little breath Melanie had left. His face looked so peaceful in unconsciousness, so unlike the vibrant, curious boy who filled her days with chatter about dinosaurs and space exploration. She reached for his hand, careful of the IV line, and was startled to find it warm. A small thing, but it anchored her. "Hey Ty guy," she whispered, using the silly nickname she hadn't uttered since he declared himself too old for it last year. "Mom's here, you're going to be okay." The machines beeped steadily in response, their rhythmic sounds the only indication that her world hadn't completely ended. Melanie leaned forward, resting her forehead against the edge of the hospital bed, and let the tears come at last. Great, heaving sobs that shook her entire body, releasing 3 days' worth of terror and helplessness. She didn't know how long she cried before a gentle hand touched her shoulder. Looking up, she found Natalie, Tyler's favorite night nurse, holding out a box of tissues. "He's a fighter, your boy," Natalie said softly, "stronger than he looks." Melanie accepted the tissues with a watery smile. He gets that from his father, she admitted, then immediately regretted it. Derek had been many things, but strong wasn't one of them. Actually, no, that's not true. He gets it from himself. Tyler's always been more resilient, more curious, more everything than Derek and I put together. Natalie smiled knowingly as she checked Tyler's vitals. Kids have a way of surprising us. She nodded toward the door. Your sister left. Melanie stiffened. You heard? Holfler heard, Natalie admitted with a wry grin. But between you and me, the way she looked when they took your son back to surgery, that wasn't just about property deeds. Melanie didn't respond, her attention caught by the slightest movement from Tyler's hand. She leaned forward eagerly. Did you see that? His fingers twitched. Natalie was already checking his pupils with a pen light. Could be reflexive, she cautioned, but Melanie saw the hope in her eyes too. Let's try something. Tyler, if you can hear me, squeeze your mom's hand. They both held their breath, staring at Tyler's limp fingers. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, so faint Melanie thought she might have imagined it, the slightest pressure against her palm. Natalie's face broke into a wide grin. I'll be damned. Kids waking up ahead of schedule. She pressed the call button. Let's get Dr. Wells down here. As nurses and doctors flooded the room, Melanie found herself pushed to the periphery. She didn't mind. That tiny squeeze had ignited a spark of hope she hadn't dared feel since the accident. Her boy was in there, fighting his way back to her. While the medical team worked, Melanie's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out to find a text from Amanda. I'm sorry for everything. However, this ends. I want you to know that Melanie stared at the words, trying to reconcile them with the sister who'd spent a lifetime looking out only for herself. The sister who'd chosen today of all days to drop a bombshell about rent. The sister who, despite everything, had looked genuinely terrified when Tyler coded. Before she could craft a response, another message came through. I signed the lease agreement. $2,200 month. No arguments. And I found a financial counselor like you suggested. First appointment is tomorrow. Melanie's fingers hovered over the screen. A month ago, hell, yesterday she would have dismissed this as another one of Amanda's manipulations, but something about today felt different. Maybe it was seeing Amanda's perfect facade crack. Maybe it was the way she'd looked at Tyler with real fear in her eyes. Or maybe it was simply that after nearly losing her son, Melanie didn't have the energy to hold on to old grudges. She typed back a simple thank you, then added, Tyler squeezed my hand. Doctor says it's a good sign. The response was immediate. Oh, thank God. Keep me posted. I'll be here if you need anything. Really? Melanie tucked her phone away as Dr. Wells approached, his expression cautiously optimistic. Pupillary responses are improving. He confirmed we're going to start gradually reducing the sedation. It might take a few days, but I think we're heading in the right direction. The relief was so profound, it left Melanie lightheaded. She gripped the bedside rail to steady herself. When will we know about? She couldn't bring herself to say the words, brain damage, cognitive deficits, the terrifying possibilities the neurologist had warned her about. Dr. Wells seemed to understand. We won't know the full extent until he's fully awake and we can run more tests, but the fact that he's responding already, that's very encouraging. As the medical team dispersed, leaving her alone with Tyler once more, Melanie sank into the chair beside his bed and finally allowed herself to imagine a future beyond this hospital room. A future where Tyler came home, where he grew up, where all of this became just another story they told about the time he gave his mother the scare of her life. She reached for his hand again, marveling at how small and fragile it felt in hers. You hear that, Ty guy? You're going to be okay. We both are. Outside the window, the first light of dawn painted the sky in pale pinks and golds. For the first time since the accident, Melanie felt the tight knot of fear in her chest begin to loosen. Whatever came next with Amanda, with the properties, with Tyler's recovery, they would face it together. And that was enough. The rhythmic beeping of Tyler's heart monitor had become a strange sort of comfort over the past week. A steady reminder that despite the tubes and bandages, his small body was still fighting. Melanie traced the edge of his protective helmet, with trembling fingers, careful not to disturb the delicate network of wires monitoring his brain activity. The plastic felt foreign and cold beneath her touch, so unlike the soft brown curls it concealed. His pupils are responding better today, Dr. Wells noted, shining a penlight across Tyler's eyes. We'll try reducing the sedative again this afternoon. He turned to Melanie with the ghost of a smile. I think we might hear from him soon. The words sent a shiver down Melanie's spine. After 10 agonizing days, her son might finally wake up. The possibility was equal parts exhilarating and terrifying. What if he didn't remember her? What if the accident had stolen the bright, curious boy who could recite dinosaur facts for hours? The neurologist had warned her repeatedly that brain injuries were unpredictable, that the Tyler who woke up might be different from the one who had skipped to the bus stop that terrible morning. A soft knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Amanda hovered in the doorway, her usual confidence replaced by palpable hesitation. Gone were the designer outfits and perfect makeup. Today she wore simple jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. In her hands, she clutched a small paper bag that smelled faintly of cinnamon. "I brought you a real breakfast," she said quietly, holding out the bag. "Not that hospital cafeteria garbage." Melanie accepted it automatically, surprised by the warmth still radiating through the paper. Inside were 2 perfect cinnamon rolls from the bakery their mother used to take them to on special occasions. The familiar scent unleashed a flood of childhood memories. Birthdays, good report cards, the occasional Saturday when their father's busy schedule would miraculously clear. "Thank you," Melanie murmured, the simple kindness catching her off guard. She broke off a piece of pastry, the sugar melting on her tongue. "They still make them the same way." Amanda hovered awkwardly near the foot of Tyler's bed, her eyes darting between the monitors and her nephew's still form. "How is he today?" "Better," Melanie said around a mouthful of cinnamon roll. "They think he might wake up soon." A complicated expression crossed Amanda's face, relief mixed with something that looked suspiciously like guilt. That's great." She cleared her throat. "I met with the financial counselor yesterday. She helped me work out a payment plan for everything." Melanie studied her sister over the rim of her coffee cup. The circles under Amanda's eyes suggested she hadn't been sleeping. Her nails, usually perfectly manicured, were bitten down to the quick. This wasn't the polished, put-together Amanda who had stormed into the hospital room with an ultimatum. This was someone far more vulnerable. "Good," Melanie said simply. She wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet, but she could acknowledge the effort. "It's a start," Amanda nodded, twisting her hands together. I'm listed some things for sale. The Cartier watch, the Chanel bag collection, ... She swallowed hard. "It should cover about half of what I owe." Melanie nearly choked on her coffee. Amanda's designer handbags had been her pride and joy, collected over years of birthdays and Christmases. Selling them represented a sacrifice Melanie wouldn't have believed possible 2 weeks ago. "That's really responsible of you," she managed, unsure what else to say. Amanda's laugh was brittle. "Don't sound so shocked. I'm capable of making good decisions occasionally." She hesitated, then added quietly, "Seeing Tyler like this, it put things in perspective." The raw honesty in her voice made Melanie look up sharply. For the first time in years, she saw not the golden child who could do no wrong, but the big sister who used to let her crawl into bed during thunderstorms. The sister who had taught her how to tie her shoes and stood up to the neighborhood bully who stole her lunch money. Before she could respond, Tyler's monitor emitted a sudden, sharp beep. His fingers twitched against the sheets, then stilled again. Both sisters froze, their shared history momentarily forgotten. Melanie was at his side in an instant, her pastry forgotten. "Baby, can you hear me?" For a long, breathless moment, nothing happened. Then, with agonizing slowness, Tyler's eyelids fluttered. His lips parted slightly, a soft groan escaping as he turned his head toward the sound of her voice. "Mom." The word was barely more than a whisper, slurred and thick with disuse, but it was unmistakable. It was him. Melanie's vision blurred with tears. She reached for his hand, careful of the 4 lines. "I'm right here, Ty guy, I'm right here." Tyler's eyes opened fully then, blinking against the harsh hospital lights. They were glassy with confusion, but they focused on her face with dawning recognition. "Hurts," he murmured, his free hand drifting toward his bandaged head. Dr. Wells materialized at the bedside, his penlight already in hand. "Tyler, welcome back. I'm Dr. Wells. Can you tell me what year it is?" Tyler's brow furrowed in concentration. 20. His voice trailed off, frustration flashing across his face. "I don't remember." Melanie's heart clenched, but Dr. Wells nodded encouragingly. "That's okay. Do you know who this is?" He gestured to Melanie. Tyler's answer was immediate. "Mom." Then, after a pause, his eyes found Amanda. "Aunt Manda." Amanda made a small, choke sound in the back of her throat. She reached for Tyler's foot, giving it a gentle squeeze through the blankets. "Hey kiddo, you gave us quite a scare." The next hour passed in a blur of neurological tests and evaluations. Tyler drifted in and out of consciousness, his responses growing slightly stronger each time he woke. He remembered his favorite dinosaur, Stegosaurus, and his teacher's name, Mrs. Alvarez, but couldn't recall what grade he was in or what had happened to land him in the hospital. The doctors assured Melanie this was normal, that memories, especially of the trauma itself, might take time to return. Through it all, Amanda stayed. Not as the domineering presence Melanie had grown accustomed to, but as a quiet support, fetching coffee when Melanie's voice grew hoarse from talking to Tyler, translating medical jargon when Melanie's exhausted brain couldn't process it. It was so unlike the sisters she knew that part of her kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. When Tyler finally fell into a natural sleep, the doctors shooed them both out to let him rest. Melanie found herself standing in the hallway with Amanda, both of them emotionally drained and running on caffeine and adrenaline. "He remembered me," Amanda said softly, staring at her hands. "After everything, he still remembered me." Melanie studied her sister's profile, the way her lower lip trembled slightly, despite her obvious effort to keep it together. The Amanda of a week ago would never have shown such vulnerability. Of course he did, she said quietly. You're his aunt. Amanda shook her head, her eyes suspiciously bright. I don't deserve that. After what I did, the way I treated you both. She took a shuddering breath. When I saw him lying there, all those tubes and machines. God, Melanie, what kind of person? Does that make me? The raw self-loathing in Amanda's voice took Melanie aback. She'd spent years resenting her sister's selfishness, her entitlement, the way she always seemed to skate through life without consequences. But seeing Amanda truly reckon with her actions for the first time was unsettling. You're here now, Melanie said finally. That counts for something. Amanda turned to face her fully, tears spilling down her cheeks. I'm sorry. For the rent thing, for a million other things, for always making everything about me. She swiped angrily at her face. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want you to know I mean it. Melanie exhaled slowly, the years of resentment and competition sitting heavy in her chest. She thought about the cinnamon rolls, about Amanda selling her precious handbags, about the way she'd stayed all day without once making the situation about herself. Maybe people could change. Maybe it wasn't too late for them. I believe you, she said at last, and thank you for being here today. Amanda nodded jerkily, clearly fighting to compose herself. Of course, whatever you need, whatever Tyler needs, I'm here. She hesitated, then added, I know I haven't been much of a sister to you, or an aunt to him, but I'd like to try, if you'll let me. Melanie thought about the years of distance between them, all the hurts and slights that had piled up like bricks in a wall. But she also thought about Tyler waking up and immediately recognizing his aunt. About the way Amanda's hands had shaken when she brought those cinnamon rolls. About the sister she'd once adored before life, and their parents had driven them apart. It won't be easy, Melanie warned. There's a lot of history there. Amanda actually smiled at that, a real smile that reached her eyes for the first time in years. Since when have Brooks women ever taken the easy way out? Against all odds, Melanie felt the corner of her mouth twitch in response. Fair point. She glanced back toward Tyler's room. He's going to need a lot of support when we get home. Therapy, doctor's appointments. And he'll have it, Amanda said firmly. All of it. However, I can help. There were 100 reasons not to trust this sudden change, a lifetime of evidence that Amanda's promises were as fleeting as her interests. But as Melanie studied her sister's face, so open and unguarded in a way she hadn't seen since they were children, she realized something fundamental had shifted between them. The accident, the ultimatum, the black envelope. It had stripped away all their usual defenses, leaving nothing but raw honesty in its wake. Okay, Melanie said simply. Okay. Amanda's shoulders sagged with relief. Okay, she echoed. Then, after a beat, for what it's worth, I always knew you'd end up outsmarting me, even when we were kids. Melanie barked out a surprised laugh. Bullshit, you thought I was a pushover. Maybe, Amanda admitted with a grin. But you were always the clever one. I just had louder voice. They stood there for a moment in the quiet hospital hallway. Two sisters who had spent a lifetime competing, finally seeing each other clearly. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. From Tyler's room, the heart monitor continued its steady beeping, a reminder that life, against all odds, went on. The first thing Tyler noticed when he woke was the smell. Not the sterile antiseptic sting of the hospital, but the warm, buttery scent of pancakes drifting through the house. He blinked against the morning light filtering through his curtains, taking inventory of his body the way the physical therapist had taught him. His head still ached sometimes where the helmet pressed against his healing skull. But the constant dizziness that had plagued his first weeks home was finally fading. Mom. His voice came out stronger than it had in months, no longer the weak grasp of those early days in the ICU. When no answer came, he carefully swung his legs over the side of the bed, pausing as the room did a slow spin before settling. The doctors said this would get better with time. Everything would. He found Melanie in the kitchen, humming softly as she flipped a golden brown pancake. The sight was so beautifully normal, it made his chest ache. For months, every meal had been carefully prepared to accommodate his nausea. Every interaction tinged with the unspoken fear that he might never fully recover. Morning, Ty guy, Melanie said without turning round, as if she could sense his presence. Hungry. Starving, he admitted, sliding into his usual chair at the kitchen table. He watched as she piled 3 pancakes onto his plate, then hesitated before adding a fourth. The small act of faith that he could eat like his old self again meant more than she probably realized. Big day today, Melanie said, setting a glass of orange juice beside his plate. You ready for your follow-up with Dr. Wells? Tyler stabbed a piece of pancake with his fork, considering the monthly neurology appointments always left him exhausted. The barrage of tests and questions stirring up memories he'd rather forget. But this one was special, the first since his surgery to replace the missing piece of his skull. I guess, he said around a mouthful of syrup-drenched pancake. Then, after a beat, will Aunt Amanda be there? Melanie paused mid-pour, coffee dripping onto the counter. Do you want her to be? Tyler shrugged, tracing patterns in his syrup with his fork. She came to my last therapy session, brought me that Lego Saturn V set afterward. He didn't mention how Amanda had sat quietly in the corner during his balance exercises. Her hands clenched so tight, her knuckles went white whenever he stumbled. Or how she'd hugged him afterward with a fierceness that surprised them both. Melanie wiped up the spilled coffee, her expression unreadable. I'll call her, she said finally. If you want her there, she should be there. The hospital waiting room hadn't changed in the months since Tyler's accident. Same uncomfortable chairs, same outdated magazines, same nervous energy clinging to the air. What was different this time was the way Amanda rushed in 15 minutes late, her hair slightly damp from the shower, carrying 3 Starbucks cups and a bag from Tyler's favorite bakery. Sorry I'm late, she panted, handing Melanie a coffee and Tyler a chocolate croissant. Meeting with the financial advisor ran long. Melanie accepted the coffee with a quiet thanks, noting the absence of Amanda's usual diamond tennis bracelet. Her sister had been true to her word these past months, attending counseling, selling off luxuries to pay her debts, showing up for Tyler in ways big and small. It was strange, this new version of Amanda who prioritized others over herself. Stranger still, how easily Melanie had come to rely on her. Dr. Wells called them back before Melanie could dwell on it further. Tyler walked on his own now, no longer needing the wheelchair or even the cane he'd used in early recovery. Only the faintest hesitation in his step betrayed the months of rehabilitation it had taken to get here. The exam passed in a blur of reflex tests and memory exercises. Tyler recited the date, named the current president, and listed his medications. Without hesitation, when Dr. Wells asked him to remember 3 words, apple, table, penny, and repeat them 5 minutes later, Tyler not only recalled them perfectly but quipped, "Can I have an apple now?" All this thinking made me hungry. Melanie's eyes burned with unshed tears at the familiar spark of humor. Her boy was coming back to her. Everything looks excellent, Dr. Wells declared, reviewing Tyler's latest scans. The bone graft has integrated perfectly. We'll keep monitoring, but at this rate, I see no reason Tyler can't return to school full-time after summer break. The news should have filled Melanie with joy. Instead, a familiar anxiety twisted in her gut. School meant playgrounds and climbing structures, and 1,000 other potential dangers. It meant trusting the world with her son again after it had nearly taken him from her. Amanda's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "He's ready," she murmured, as if reading her thoughts. "And you are too." Later, as they celebrated with milkshakes at the diner Tyler loved, Melanie watched her sister and son debate the merits of different Star Wars movies with surprising intensity. Amanda, who had once rolled her eyes at anything nerdy, now argued passionately about lightsaber colors as if her life depended on it. Tyler's laughter rang out clear and strong, his helmet sitting beside him on the booth like a relic from another life. "You kept it," Amanda noted quietly when Tyler excused himself to the restroom. Melanie ran a finger along the helmet's smooth surface. "I thought about throwing it away 100 times, but it's part of his story now. Our story." Amanda stirred her straw in her milkshake, the ice cream long since melted. "Do you ever think about that day when you tried to evict me while my son was in a coma?" Melanie finished dryly. Occasionally, the old Amanda would have bristled at the reminder, would have spun some justification to make herself the victim. This Amanda simply nodded, her expression open and remorseful. "I think about it every day. How close I came to losing you both forever." The raw honesty caught Melanie off guard. In the months since Tyler's accident, they'd fallen into an uneasy truce, focusing on his recovery rather than their fractured past. But here, in this sticky diner booth with pop music playing too loud overhead, it felt like time to clear the air. "Why did you do it?" Melanie asked softly. "Really?" Amanda's fingers tightened around her straw. "I was scared, and when I'm scared, double quotes." She exhaled sharply. "I become our father. All threats and bluster and pushing people away before they can leave me." The admission hung between them, heavy with decades of unspoken truths. Melanie had spent her life reacting to Amanda's drama, but she'd never stopped to consider what drove it, that beneath all the bravado, her sister was just as insecure, just as desperate for love and approval as she was. "I wouldn't have let you become homeless," Amanda continued. "Even if you hadn't owned the damn building, I just needed you to think I would." Melanie studied her sister the way her carefully applied lipstick had faded, the faint lines around her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. For the first time, she saw Amanda not as the golden child who'd overshadowed her entire life, but as another wounded person trying her best with the tools she'd been given. "I know," Melanie said simply, and she did. Somewhere between the hospital vigils and therapy appointments, between the shared worries and small victories, she'd learned to see past the persona to the flawed, struggling woman beneath. Amanda's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "When Tyler woke up and recognized me, God, Mel, I didn't realize how much I'd missed until I almost lost it all." Tyler chose that moment to return, sliding back into the booth with his usual enthusiasm. Who's ready for round 2 of Star Wars debates? Aunt Amanda, explain to me again how you think Rey is a Skywalker when the movie's clearly Amanda held up a hand, her composure snapping back into place with practiced ease. Save your nerd rage, kid. I have visual aids at home that will destroy your argument completely. Melanie laughed, the sound surprising her as much as it delighted Tyler. You made PowerPoint slides about Star Wars. Not slides, Amanda corrected primly. A fully annotated timeline with cited sources. Some of us take our pop culture seriously. As their banter continued, Melanie sat back, content to watch this new dynamic unfold. The road ahead wouldn't be smooth. Tyler still had occasional memory lapses and fatigue. Amanda's recovery from her gambling addiction was ongoing, and Melanie herself still woke some nights in a cold panic, convinced Tyler was back in the hospital. But in this moment, with the afternoon sun streaming through the diner windows and her son's laughter ringing in her ears, Melanie allowed herself to believe what she hadn't dared hope in those dark ICU nights, that they would all be okay. More than okay, even. When the check came, Amanda snatched it before Melanie could react. My treat, she said firmly. Then, with a wink at Tyler, besides, your mom needs to save her money for when I destroy her at minigolf next weekend. Tyler whooped with excitement as they stepped out into the parking lot, the summer air warm on their faces. Without thinking, Melanie reached for Amanda's hand, squeezing it briefly before letting go. The gesture felt foreign and familiar all at once, like rediscovering a language she'd spoken long ago. Amanda smiled, small and genuine, then ruffled Tyler's hair. Race you to the car, kid. As Tyler took off with a gleeful shout, Melanie lingered, for a moment, watching her sister jog after her son with an energy she hadn't seen in years. The black envelope still sat in her desk at home, a reminder of how far they'd come. But standing here in the golden afternoon light, Melanie realized she didn't need documents or deeds to know what she owned. She had everything that mattered right in front of her.